Since stepping into the Oval Office last week, US President Joe Biden has lost no time at all in taking executive action to support millions of Americans whose livelihoods have been displaced by the COVID-19 pandemic. He signed key presidential orders to speed up and widen access to stimulus checks and food assistance for low-income families, as well as to protect the health and labour rights of vulnerable workers. But he's only just getting started. President Biden has proposed a $1.9 trillion American rescue plan that includes an additional $1,400 per person payment, $400 a week in unemployment benefits, $400 billion for the vaccine and reopening schools, and $21 billion for childcare assistance and healthcare subsidies. Key members of his economic team, Janet Yellen and Bernie Sanders, are strongly pushing for Congress to pass this plan against Republican resistance. As the country adds more than 175,000 infection cases a day, businesses remaining closed and millions of workers having lost their jobs. We discussed all of this today with Neil Mahoney, Professor of Economics at Stanford University. We also have joining us Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us today. And, well, why don't we start with you, Dr. Mahoney? Now, this $1.9 trillion plan, Republicans have been balking at the price tag of President Joe Biden's plan, given that the country has already spent close to $5 trillion last year. His Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, she said that the key thing right now is to act big and worry later about debt and so on to avoid a long-term recession. And, of course, this is her second time to take federal office during a crisis. Do you trust her judgment on this?
Yeah, well, great to be back on the show. And I do think she's the right person for the job right now. She has tremendous experience, as you say. And I think she knows the lesson from the Great Recession as well as anybody, which was, during the Great Recession, the Obama administration probably didn't go big enough. And the cost was a slower than necessary recovery. And so the Biden administration understands this, understands that there's a bigger risk of going too small than too big, and I think is being appropriate in trying to be as aggressive as possible in their response right now.
Right, so you're saying there's a bigger risk in acting small than acting big. And Dr. Yang, would you agree with this? Do you agree that Congress should act big, as Professor Mahoney and also Janet Yellen said? And how feasible do you think Yellen's plan to tax unrealized capital gains is, and what would this entail exactly?
Okay, well, I think the going big is the correct answer, not only because what we've seen in the Great Recession, but what we saw even before then in the Great Depression, and even with the lost 20 years that we had in Japan. We see that when the stimulus is not big enough, it doesn't spark a recovery in the economy. And basically, I think the past history has shown us that whenever you have such a big shock as this, we need to have as big stimulus as possible. Now, we may disagree about some of the details in the plan, but as far as the overall idea of going big, I think that is necessary. And then this unrealized capital tax gain, well, there's been idea floated, and we don't know the details, but the unrealized capital gains basically means that you'll be charged even if you don't sell your stocks or your investment. If the current market price goes up, then you'll be charged with the potential profit that you can make. But the problem is the market price justified? Maybe in a bubble, and there's no way that you can tell whether this is a true underlying value of the price because it changes so often. And also, what happens if you don't have an unrealized gain but unrealized loss, where the market price falls below the purchase price? In that case, would you get a refund, or would you just be out of luck? Those kind of details we should know, and until we know, we can't tell for sure. But I'm not too crazy about that idea.
And Dr. Mahoney, while Yellen has mostly enjoyed bipartisan support, do you think she can convince Republicans to get on board when it comes to measures like hiking corporate tax from 21% to 28%, as well as raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour? What kind of challenges do you think she's going to face?
Well, I think as most of your viewers know, the Senate is split 50-50 with Vice President Harris as the deciding vote. So things are going to be tough, and the senators who are pivotal, they're going to get a bunch of goodies when bills are going through the Senate. But I do think Janet Yellen and the rest of the Biden administration has been very clever in how they've put together this rescue package. They've managed to combine elements which are, I think, very popular with voters with elements which are good for the economy. So think about the $1,400 checks. I think that voters are very excited about. I think even the minimum wage, the rise in the minimum wage to $15 is something for which there's pretty strong support in the electorate. In Florida in November, we saw 60% of voters in a state that Trump won supporting a $15 minimum wage. So they're going to be combining those popular aspects with a number of other aspects which are either good economics or maybe more partisan. And I think that's going to be a successful strategy, although there's going to be a number of modifications, I think, as things go through Congress.
And there's been a great deal of attention, Dr. Mahoney, on how Janet Yellen is going to push through some of the administration's key economic policies. And while the Trump administration, they pushed for a weaker US currency to boost exports. But Yellen said last Tuesday at the Senate Finance Committee's confirmation hearing that she won't be seeking a weak dollar and that the dollar's value should be determined by the markets. What impact do you think this would have?
So I'm not an international economist, so this is not my area of expertise, but I do know the US has a sort of long-standing policy commitment to market-determined exchange rates and a strong and stable dollar. And I do remember when the Trump administration sort of flirted with the idea of shifting away from that commitment, that it generated unnecessary disruption and volatility in the markets. I think moving back to, what has been US policy for sort of over a quarter century and is a sensible policy, I think will be good for the US and for the global economy.
And the US, of course, being the world's biggest economy, all countries are really paying attention to what's going to happen, what's going to come from the Biden administration. And Dr. Yang, what effect do you think a stronger dollar will have, particularly on the Korean economy?
Okay, well, basically what Trump wanted to do was to have a weak dollar, have a beggar thy neighbor policy, and you don't construct a international consensus when each country wants to beggar thy neighbor. So I think that's a wise move, and it's a move that's designed to get international support for other international trade policies later on by the Biden administration. As for how it will affect Korea, well, if you look at after the 2008 financial crisis, when the international economy is more or less stable, I think, at least from the point of view of Korea and perhaps China as well, we've seen a weaker dollar when things were stable and stronger dollar when things were unstable. So as the economy goes, international economy becomes more stabilized, I think, at least from the point of view of Korea, we should see a weaker dollar. Theoretically, that would help Korean exports. I'm not quite sure how much it'll help. Again, since about 2008, exchange rates and trade volume, export volume doesn't seem to be that correlated, that much related. I think it's more important correlation is the actual global trade volume rather than exchange rates. That's partially because I think Korea is moving away from price competitiveness for a lot of its exports. For smartphones, it's not really slight differences in price which matters, but the quality. And then for memory chips, Korea's main export item, that is price competitive, that is sensitive to price, but for the last few years, it's almost a situation of excess demand because the large IT firms want to invest more in its infrastructure. So I think even if the exchange rate strengthens, dollar strengthens, it will not have too much of an effect on Korean exports.
Well, of course, with South Korea being a very export-reliant economy, and of course, we haven't had a very easy time with former President Trump's trade policies, having had to revisit the South Korea-US FTA and a lot of issues regarding Samsung and LG Electronics products in America, things like that. And there are concerns that the Biden administration might retain some of former President Trump's protectionist policies on trade. Do you think that's likely, Dr. Yang, and how should Korean businesses prepare?
Okay, well, I think the measure that people are looking at right now is the one act that's supposedly to be signed today, the strengthening of the Buy American Act. Now, Korea is a signatory to WTO government procurement agreement, so at least legally, we should be exempt from most of the Buy American Act requirements, except when it deals with American small and medium-sized businesses and the racial and gender-based procurement. But we'll have to see the details, but it'll signal how much perhaps President Biden wants to stick to the WTO scenario rules and how much he wants to change those rules. So I'm looking forward to seeing the details of the executive order that he'll sign today. As far as more general arrangements, more general policy is concerned, I think President Biden will stick to the rules rather than try to do whatever he feels like what President Trump did. So if nothing else, it'll give us a much more transparent, much more stable environment, and that's always better for individual companies. Also, there had been worries somewhat early in the Trump administration that all global value chains will be brought back to the United States as much as possible. But I think even President Trump gave up on that because toward the end of his administration, he was looking at setting up international global value chains with trusted partners rather than do everything within the United States. So there will still be tension between U.S. and China, but at least it'll be predictable. It'll be more rule-based. WTO will have some of its rules back again. So at least it'll be better than Trump.
So the world is hoping and, well, expecting a lot more stability, I suppose. And Dr. Mahoney, of course, once Janet Yellen is confirmed as Treasury Secretary, hopefully she'll bring stability back as well. And, well, Yellen actually is known for making rather bold moves during her time in the Federal Reserve. What other key initiatives do you expect her to focus on during her time in the Biden administration after tackling the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, it's a great question. And thinking back, when we first spoke, I think it was in May, almost a year ago, I said that the number one focus should be on the virus. Even if you only care about the economy, that you have to tackle the virus to get the economy going again. And I do think the Biden administration understands that, and they won't lose their focus on the virus too soon. But I'm optimistic. Maybe by this summer, early fall, that we will have the virus in the rearview mirror. I think the next item that the Biden administration will focus on is inequality. That over the last 4 years in the US, there's really been a overdue but very important sort of increase in understanding about racial inequality across different income groups, between different communities. And I think the folks in the Biden administration understand how important it is to start pushing against that inequality by investing in health, investing in education, trying to shift the tax code in a way that promotes equality. And so I do think that that is going to be the next item on the agenda of Janet Yellen and the other White House policymakers.
So this isn't just about only about overcoming the virus, but as President Biden said, building back stronger, and it all sounds very exciting, and we hope to hear more about it. And well, I'm afraid this is where we're going to have to end the discussion today, but that was Dr. Neil Mahoney, Professor of Economics at Stanford University, and Dr. Yan Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Thank you again, both of you, for your time today.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.